I specifically represent that, but I think generally millers are the ones or the key stakeholders in this process. So as it was mentioned before, one of the challenges is that the costs or the cost of doing that, or the cost of fortification might be somehow high, and it might not incentivize them to include it in their process. So if there was a means of supporting those industries and supporting the low income, might not be direct, but through these millers, and any support that goes to the millers will indirectly be transferred to the low income population. For example, I know that TechnoServe and other aid organizations have also such programs where they have a support system for the fortification and other essential minerals or essential product distribution programs. So if they could strengthen that process, and if they still support or widen their support, I think they are also doing it now. It means that the millers will also not be stopping and will be expanding the process, and will try to reach the much larger population than what they are doing now. And I think that is the only means, because otherwise you cannot just directly go and support the community, which will be difficult. So the best way is to have these support mechanisms, to strengthen it, and to continue that in a wider possible way. And I think there will be also means to check it. I mean, if the support will be caught in the middle and not transferred to the target group, I think there will be some mechanisms to check that, or some kind of review to check whether that support is reaching the target group. So I assume that will be the best way, and I think it has been begun before, and I think it should be continued further.
Lovely.
That is the thing that I consider about reaching of the low-income communities.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Christina, before we go heading off around the group a bit more, do you want any sort of half a minute's reflection, or would you like to carry on listening to some of the other people who've joined this session today?
Yeah, let's continue. And maybe I really like, Yannick, the structure you provided. At least what I heard is to think about how can we invest in local analytical capability, local production of inputs, and local capacity building. So it's a pretty wide space, but you also have attendance from many different angles. If you can share something around these three themes, how we can invest and build that local capacity, I will continue to collect here on my sheet.
Amazing. Gosh, you guys are obviously, you'll be the next bit of research at Harvard, everybody. And so I'm going to move to Malouna. Do you want to share with us where's your thinking with the questions and what you've heard today, Malouna? I'm going to give you, with sort of cutting down the time a little bit, I'm going to give you literally a minute. It sounds horribly short, but Malouna, I'd love to hear from you. Mr. Lemma, I can see you. Would you like to share? Can you take yourself off mute? Malouna Lemma? Oh, I think the technology's go on. You can do it. Take yourself off mute. You can find it. I had this problem. When you're on your phone, it's really hard. I had this problem the other day. Okay. So when you find your mute button, just let me know and just jump in. I'm going to instead turn to Karen, who's been waiting very patiently. Karen, hello. How are you finding the conversation today? What's your thinking on the local investment?
Well, I think the conversation is really interesting. One of the things that struck me from the opening remarks was this notion that consumers don't value the fortification process. And or don't value the fortified foods. And given the enormous return on it, so a $1 gives us this massive investment, I'm thinking, how can we get consumers to value this more, and that it builds a greater market so that there's pressure, not just pushing it out into the market, but having consumers really say, this is something I'm interested in. What role can big food play in that? They have tons of branding money. They have a big voice in the market. And so I'm just, kind of wondering if they could help with the reframing and pushing out of that message.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Charles, do you want to leap in now? How's your thinking on this topic and what you've heard today? Oh, Charles, you took yourself off mute and then you put it back on again. Can you try one more time? If not, I've been having long conversations with Charles in the chat, so we can always do a chat. Go on, Charles. Oh, the technology is failing. Go on, Charles. You can do it. Okay, Charles, there you go. Yes.
I'm
Oh, hold on. I'm going to turn your camera off. I'm going to try my hardest to hopefully we'll be able to see you. So keep talking, Charles. Can you speak now?
Yes, I'm saying I was shocked to get the numbers from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers of Millers Association in regards to malnourishment levels. And then I would say the government has a big role when it comes to taking providing these materials to the millers. Also ensuring that these things are also put in the foods, the deliverables.
Thank you very much, Charles. Can I now bring in Hesham? Hello, Hesham. How have you found this conversation today? Let's see whether we can. Yes.
Actually, I mean, that's very interesting for me. It's just the first time that I have like this term of food fortification. However, I'm interested actually to have like this another two terms, which is like building the experience and the competitiveness. So I'm going to have it like very summarized. I have 4 points in my mind that could add for this building the experience. The first one is exchange of experience, both on 3 levels, which is the farmer, the products, and the ecosystem itself. So I think this would add for the building the capacity on building the experience and the competitiveness as well. So the other point will be like the educating customers, and I think Karen like raised one of these points, which is like the consumer are not interested in this fortification. So how we can educate the customers, both farmers and also the producers and also the consumers. Third thing is like the values like for the market, like transparency and sharing the knowledge and the information and accessible of this information, especially the technical information. The last thing, which is the engagement of the like different generations and engagement of the technology and the modern tools that can like make like life easy for the production system and for the production process. That's all for me. I mean, that's and it's very interesting for me to know more about this topic. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hesham, and great to have you. I'm going to quickly run down the list just in case. If I call your name, you're very welcome just to say hi or to add your thoughts. Don't feel as though you have to have something specific to say, but if you want to, I am just going to call out your name because there's nothing like having your name called out on the internet. So just in case, Charles, you are able to take yourself off mute, or Elizabeth Kushney, or Hiba Saeed. Karen, we've already heard from you. Maria, or Mildred, would any of you guys like to speak? Feel free just to take yourselves off mute and just say hi. And if you want to contribute, you're very welcome. Okay. In which case, I would love to say hello to Kindra, to Mohammed, to Monojit, and to Maluna. Would anybody like to say hello? I'm going to keep going down the list because it's very nice having your name called out. To Monica, to Nali, to Nelson, and to Oliver. There's a massive hello from me. If anybody would like to say hi, we would love to hear from you.
Hi, I don't speak English very well, but here I am. I can listen, but it's difficult for me to speak because I'm from Peru. I speak Spanish.
Oh, I'm sorry. My colleagues all speak Spanish, but my Spanish is rubbish. Monica, brilliant to have you here, and welcome to you joining from Peru. Absolutely fantastic to have you too. Monica, if you want to jump into the chat and add your thoughts there, if that's easier for you, you're very welcome. I've also got Rebecca. We've got two Rebeccas. We've got Rebecca Palmer and Rebecca Regan Sanchez. Hello. Yes, clapping from Rebecca Palmer. To Ricky, to Rohan, to Sarah, to Son. Hello out there. If anybody wants to say hi, you're very welcome. Hi, Oliver. We can see you too. And to Sue Adkins as well. I can see you there. Brilliant. Maluna, do you think you might be able to take yourself off mute now? Have you figured it out? He's trying so hard. No worries. In which case, we'll go back round again. Yannick, actually, let's start with you, Dominic, if that's okay with you. Dominic, from what you've heard so far and the conversations you've had, where's your sort of freshest thinking? Is there anything you want to add to that?
Thanks, Katie. I really liked Karen's idea of seeing how not only harnessing the technical knowledge that's flowing through the business to business kind of relationships, but also the resources that go into demand creation, that go into developing brands, and how that can help to create greater understanding and appreciation among consumers for fortified foods, so that it has more sticking power. So I thought that was really, really helpful. The other thing that sometimes it goes without saying, but probably should never, and that I'm picking up from the speakers is, of course, all of this is highly customized. In each country, you've got cultures of food, you've got the commodities themselves, you've got the industrial footprint. All of these are major drivers of what's possible, what's fortifiable, and to really understand that context is really in the hands of local millers. They know their context better than anyone. They know that what's required to deliver good quality food in those kinds of business environments, and to be ears wide open, listening to what they have to say about their challenges is, of course, extremely important.
Fantastic. I think Maluna's managed to take himself off mute. Hi, Maluna. Come on. Can you speak to us? Can you say hi? Hey, Maluna. Mr. Lima. He's battling with that technology. You can tell. Look at the concentration on his face. Come on, we can do it. Is it going to work? Say
No,
hello.
I'm just.
Yes,
Can you hear me now?
we can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just having a little trouble on the network. So I think you can hear me. I'm Muluna Lemma from Ethiopia, from Ethiopian Millers Association and the Wakene Food Complex, the owner. So this is a very interesting session, but I was late because of the network in and out. So I just heard a little bit about all comments. Actually, we are working hard in Ethiopia. This is actually the first time doing fortification. Is not on the market yet, but the government commitment and the leadership commitment is very well. We are doing very well thanks to TechnoServe. I mean, they are working the last year very hard, wearing the people, also wearing the technicians, but we have some problems to start up. Actually, the government already do the mandatory for the last 2 months. So, but we not start yet. We are trying to avoid those tackles, especially on the premix and the dosing fire. Actually, the dosing fire is not a big problem, but the premix we're not producing in the country. We have to get it from outside of the country, or so some of the partners, they should produce the premix in Ethiopia. That's the main thing we have a challenge right now, but hopefully we are solve this problem probably a month or two. So we are committed and to do this, but it's very interesting. It's not all about the market issue, or it's not a choice actually for Ethiopia. Most of the people have to use this fortified food, especially on edible oil and wheat flour. So we all committed. I mean, hopefully we will start within 1 month. That's what I'm hoping. That's all I have for today. Thank you.
Maluna, I'm so delighted that we got to hear from you. It's fantastic. Thank you for adding that. And also to Charles, who's in the chat, who didn't manage to get himself off mute, but has managed to contribute super important pieces. We've got the teams coming back from the other groups at the moment now for you, Christina. So hopefully that was, our conversation was pretty... We covered a lot of ground really rapidly there. But also, what I think we've also found is that we've got friends all over the world in loads of different countries who are all wrestling on the same thing. So if you haven't already, do jump into that chat function and go and meet other people. There will be somebody in here, even if they don't have your answers, they might share the same problems as you have. So please do get and connect and meet everybody else. Christina, I'm going to hand over to you. I've also got your slide, Christina, because you were talking beautifully to this really complicated piece earlier on, and I have it for you now.
Okay.
So if you want, I can put it in the chat or I can show it to everybody as well. So I'm ready for you, Christina.
Great. Thank you everybody for joining this conversation. First of all, I feel really moved in a way that we're having this conversation with people around the world, and Miller's joining from Ethiopia, from Asia, from Peru, from everywhere. And this in the context of the United Nations week. Somehow, to me, that is the spirit of the United Nations, that we are living here. And so thank you for making an effort, despite technology not always being with us. But that itself, I think, means a lot. And maybe just to give you a gist to the other groups of what happened in our conversation. So we talked about how we can invest locally to build expertise and competitiveness. And we started off with somehow organizing the space and identifying the kinds of market infrastructure that we need to invest in. Beyond the capacity building, there's also the analytical capability of testing, and there's also the local production of premix, which would make the whole process a lot more resilient and less dependent on others. And what we heard then in the conversation is, the role of government as one important player in the space. How can government come in to facilitate these kinds of investments, to maybe act as a partner, as well as the role of technology that makes, some of these investments easier to shoulder, or there are now new solutions when it comes to testing. For example, there are smaller and cheaper testing devices that can be applied. We don't need a huge lab each and everywhere anymore. So these are, I think, interesting contributions that we will continue to work on. There was also a point on where the consumer comes in and how we build infrastructure in terms of consumer awareness and how we invest in that. So that's very briefly where our conversation went. And I'm curious to hear from the other groups. Richard, maybe I'm handing over to you.
Great. Christina, thank you very much. Likewise, we had a great conversation in our group. We were looking at how can we accelerate progress in building testing capacity and strengthening transparency mechanisms for results to generate more accountability. And I think for us, there was three main takeaways that I'd like to cluster the insights around. What I think was, a key message I heard was how can we do more to empower millers to test and to give them the skills, the technology, to do that more and to be more masters of their own fates when it comes to the premix they're using and selecting. And we heard from different people in the room about how the technology that they're providing is helping with that. I think a second area that we talked around, was the scope for more digital innovation in the space. How can we introduce more new sort of technologies that perhaps break down the barriers between the industry and the regulator, and allow for more timely and more effective sharing of data, perhaps moving beyond some of the more manual, more sort of slow and costly ways of testing. And we had some great examples, I think, from Anna from Barnlit, what they're doing in that area to sort of move forward with this digital space. And I think the third area we talked around was actually, the power of transparency mechanisms. In fact, they can and do work, and the importance of celebrating success. But at the same time, being always aware and balancing the interests of the public sector, of government, of regulators, with the needs of industry. And I think this idea that with the sort of transparency mechanisms that we're seeing, like the MFI in Nigeria, is creating those sort of risk-based frameworks that give governments the confidence that industry is fortifying to correct standards, but giving them more space to use the resources they have to focus on the areas of the industry and the millers that need the most help, and are perhaps the ones that are sort of lagging behind the most. So in summary, it's about empowering millers, how we can focus on and scale up digital innovations, and the power of transparency mechanisms. But I think the final takeaway, just to put in the room, is putting millers at the centre of all this. Recognizing that millers have often a lot of the insights and the experience that that can really help us in this area, and the importance of keeping them front and center of all these conversations. So with that, I'll pause and hand back to you, Christina.
Yeah, and I guess we can go straight to Tanya and the third group to hear from them.
Thanks, Christina. So the third group discussed, what about reaching the most vulnerable populations with fortified foods, and those populations who are not just vulnerable by the fact that they're underserved, but they also might be hard to reach geographically. So we actually got quite a full room with a lot of contributions and a very lively discussion. But I think if I had to group together the key takeaways that I heard during the discussion, is that these populations can't be reached without the right partnerships. And on one axis, you have the partnerships, such as the model that we observed, which is between the private sector and NGOs. But that would also mean partnering together with the public sector. So whether that is on the axis of regulation support, or just by the fact of governments and local governments, county governments promoting food fortification, so that they're working also on the smaller scale. But it could also mean working with safety net schemes, for example, in the countries. Another key takeaway is the need for adaptability and incentives. So adapting the knowledge that exists out there for large-scale food fortification on the industry level to smaller and medium-sized mills, to make sure that the quality is right and remains up to standards, so that the most vulnerable people actually do get the nutrition that they deserve and that they're lacking. And then also in terms of incentives, we need the right incentives there for millers. On the policy level, but also in terms of making it easy for them to fortify, should they want to fortify, and making it easy for them to fortify to the right standards. And lastly, there are some issues that also participants pointed out that exist, for example, with having unbranded staple foods that are not fortified to the correct quality standards, which are reaching the poorest people, because this is what they can afford, is buying in bulk. And we also heard of some other very good examples of partnerships between governments and communities, for example, in Pakistan, to raise the awareness for the consumers, and therefore raising the demand for fortified foods. So I think I'll leave it at that. But yeah, many thanks to the wonderful group in the discussion and the wonderful facilitation.
Thank you, Tanya. And so that was our interactive part. We want to close it with announcing something really exciting, and I'm handing it over to Dominic for that last bit. Stay on.
Thanks very much, Christina. And just before I say anything, I want to thank It's Poverty for really facilitating us through this conversation. It's fantastic. And to Indiva, Christina, you and your team for not only authorship of the report, but again, for pulling this together. It's been enormously insightful and helpful too. Finally, to say thank you very much to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for their ongoing support to large-scale food fortification and to our strategic fortification partners, many of them represented here as well. And they'll be mentioned in my presentation. I understand that I won't be sharing my screen, that the presentation will be projected as I'm speaking. Is that right? Or should I just share my screen? There it is. Oh, sort of.
Sorry about that, Dominic. I don't know what happened. Technical glitch.
Yeah, no worries, Katie. I feel privileged since Christina didn't get a chance to show her presentation, so I'm happy that this one is showing. But I have a number of slides that can.
Sorry to interrupt. We're going to put Christina's presentation. There's going to be a link into the chat to the slide that Christina, the beautiful, amazing schematic that Christina was talking about. So have a look in the chat, team. It's there. Sorry, Dominic, over to you.
And I will scan through these slides as well, and so perhaps this presentation can be shared with participants if they want to have a more detailed look. But if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, please. So we've seen in the report a number of barriers to sustaining food fortification, and particularly not just fortifying foods, but fortifying to national standards. Lack of industry incentives were mentioned, inconsistent premix quality were mentioned, the insufficient sharing of data and the opportunities for digitalization that might overcome that, lack of effective cross-sectoral engagement, and essentially low consumer awareness and demand for fortification. All of these poses barriers to sustaining the effort, to sustaining the investment. Next slide, please. And what we've heard from Millers and Paloma in our opening remarks as well was that in order to make this work for industry, we really do need to be pursuing a level playing field in terms of the competitive structure of the sector, to optimize efficiency of production as well, to open up the margins, the rooms for these tight margin processing of commodities, to open up the room for further investments in the quality of those commodities as they're processed. To really elevate positive examples of leading brands that have made these investments and increased access by consumers to good quality food that's nutritious and safe. And of course, simplification of the best food fortification practices. So a number of tools that we've been working with in order to deliver that. And ultimately, the entryway in working with industries really has to do with establishing trust. And ensuring that we're being responsive to how industry perceives their challenges. And so as we think about business cases and enhancing the enabling environment for food fortification, we do need to be thinking about maximizing the profitability and the competitiveness of these businesses. It's the business performance itself that will help to sustain the investments in large-scale food fortification. And of course, to encourage consistent regulation. This really ties into leveling the playing field. Next slide, please. And we've seen some good impacts. Just a couple of slides here. Example in Nigeria, where we started with just over 50% of the flour processed in Nigeria being adequately fortified to national standards. And over time, we saw with the engagement of industry in this way, a significant rise, up to about 93%. But then when COVID hit, the supply chain disruptions that were associated with that, conflict in Ukraine, putting constraints on access to grain, and 90% of wheat is imported into Nigeria, so that has a huge impact. We saw significant reduction. So real business, macro business issues having an impact at enterprise level saw a dip in compliance. Next, please. Interestingly, in edible oil, this is a very sophisticated sector, but really very small portion relative to the total oil consumed, edible oil consumed in Nigeria, was industrially processed and fortifiable. But with the closure of borders during the pandemic, what we saw was less trade of informally traded and loose oil, which meant population was relying more on the packaged product. And so we saw an increase in access by consumers to good quality fortified edible oil. And so that's a sort of an interesting counterpoint to what can happen as these macro challenges take place. Next, please. And so some of the key areas of success that we've seen has to do with making sure that there's data on compliance that's available so that we can really drive the conversation around accountability. That effective technical assistance delivery is customized and is focused on how industry sees the challenges that they're facing. Building innovative partnerships, again, that draw on the sector skills, expertise, know-how of a range of different organizations and companies is really working. And then, of course, addressing premix quality issues. This is something that we discovered is the root of a lot of the low compliance or lower compliance that we saw in Kenya and Nigeria during the pandemic period. So we see real areas of potential around rice fortification, for example, sharing data through digital backbone, the micronutrient fortification index that Paloma mentioned earlier, and governance and accountability for sustainability. So really link this into key performance indicators, many of them drawn from how we view the Sustainable Development Goals as well, and how those kind of ratchet down to an enterprise level. And then finally, making sure that regulation is consistent, is predictable. These are all elements of potential that we see for enhancing the successes that we've had so far. Next, please. And this is the landing page for the Kenyan Millers Fortification Index that Paloma had mentioned. Really interesting opportunity, highly endorsed by the regulators and ministries, relevant ministries in Kenya, as a complementary approach to their own government-led regulation of food quality. Here, this is industry stepping up, as Paloma mentioned, seeing their responsibility and joining together as competitors, joining together to for a race to the top, to position their brands as of best quality. Next, please. And so this new initiative that we've been working on with our strategic fortification partners, Endeavour, and with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, really centers on the motivation of millers, their capabilities, and the opportunity to fortify. So these are key elements that we're trying to address or harness through the tools that we're packaging together. Next, please. And so the shift of a new approach really is about bolstering private sector leadership of food fortification, including self-regulation mentioned earlier. It targets the motivation and elements of food fortification journey, not only the technical capabilities. It's not about only working at the plant floor, figuring out where the dosifier is, but integrating food fortification good practice into business decision-making, tracking the quality of food fortification, not just at the end, but throughout the value chain, and really, again, using a data-driven approach to do this. Building trust among millers in the cross sectors. It's really, really fundamental to this exercise. And then adopting a collective impact approach, recognizing that there's no one organization or company or agency that's going to solve such a huge intractable development challenge as malnutrition, that we all need to work together, but we all need to be working in our self-interest together in order to sustain that collaboration. Next, please. And so the Millers for Nutrition Initiative is a private sector-led coalition that puts millers at the center, as Richard mentioned earlier. And it's supported by a range of players from the food fortification value chain. We mentioned millers, but at the second tier there, we also have a number of the ingredient suppliers, equipment suppliers, and other companies that are involved in supporting the enabling environment from a miller's perspective for good quality food fortification by providing these ingredients, this equipment, but also the know-how that they are passing on to their customers. And these strategic fortification partners, we hope will grow in number and also in representation in the global south. And then, of course, this is being facilitated by a sort of backbone support to the ecosystem that we're trying to influence. Technoserve playing a key role there, but with our strategic and implementation partners like Endeavour, like the Nutrition International, like the Gain Premix facility, and others. Next, please. The initiative initially will be implemented in 8 countries. We'll be focusing on 3 commodities: edible oil, vegetable oil, rice, and flour. That's both maize and wheat flour. And the 8 countries are listed there, many of them represented on this call. Next, please. As I mentioned, this idea of motivating companies, really understanding how to support them. We're bringing together 3 components of that motivation: to celebrate them, to enable them, and then to encourage them. And each one of those with a divine set of tools that will help us to engage with companies at that level. Again, the idea being that this is good business. And the business case built around this means that integrating food fortification into business decision making is really key. It's important, I think, to view millers not as machines, not as little large factory, which inevitably comes to mind when we start talking about food processing, but as individuals running businesses that are making important business decisions. And I think we are all very familiar with the narrative of the smallholder farmer. These are people that TechnoServe have been working with as business people for decades now. The narrative of the smallholder farmer being a hero, being able to produce the food that so many populations rely on, including themselves, against all odds. Climate conditions, conflict, and so forth, and we've really personified that heroism. But as soon as we start talking about food processing, we start thinking about machines and factories and so forth. And really, what we want to position here are the food processors, the millers themselves, as heroes every time they make a decision and a choice to invest in good quality food fortification. Next, please. This unpacks a little bit further, and I won't go into detail the schematic, but unpacks further what we mean by celebrate, encourage, and enable. And as I mentioned earlier, this presentation will be shared with you, but it's intended to trigger a whole bunch of levers in the ecosystem that supports food fortification, including around access to finance. Next, please. And so our vision is an upward spiral for better nutrition. And the Millers for Nutrition Coalition aims to establish a sustainable, inclusive market for fortification by working along the value chain, ultimately reducing malnutrition and improving human health. And our ambition together is to reach 1 billion people over 4 years in the commodities mentioned earlier. Next, please. Our strategic priorities over the remaining months of this year are to launch the Millers for Nutrition initiative. It will be launched at the Micronutrient Forum that will be held in The Hague in a few weeks' time. This is a really important meeting in the nutrition community. It's one of the largest meetings that bring together regulators, government, the not-for-profit sector, and businesses around the issue of addressing micronutrient malnutrition. Would also encourage you to register for this. We're on an active drive to onboard millers to the Millers for Nutrition initiative. And we are launching an integrated digital relationship management, product quality tracking, and knowledge hub for this. And of course, continuing to support thought leadership through the dissemination of good practice, such as the report this meeting is about. Next, please. So be part of Millers for Nutrition. As we announce the launch in a couple of weeks, we'd love for you to join as a miller, as a technical partner, as a donor. We can make the choice to invest in improved food quality and nutrition. We can make the choice to rely on each other and to work together. And we are choosing to act now to build trust and to scale up food fortification in ways that can be sustained. And we'd really love for you to join us. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Christina, before we close out this session and get all ready for our next one, is there anything else that you would like to say to this group today?
Well, thank you, Dominic, for introducing us to Millers for Nutrition. And there's a big part of this group here in the chat that's very excited about the next 4 weeks and running up to the launch. And if you're not part of that group yet, Dominic has already invited you. I also invite you, just stay in touch with us. You can, send me an email or type your name in the chat so we can keep you in the loop. You can receive the documentation of the session, and we'll also include updates on the launch and the initiative and where it's happening. So yeah, just use it as a way to keep engaged, and thank you very much for joining.
Amazing. Oh, what a session, guys. And oh my goodness, if you haven't all got connected in the chat, well, you have. I've seen like the 20 messages just since I was sharing those slides that Dominic was going through. So absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. And that's what Business Fights Poverty is all about, is bringing together the community from around the world, wherever you are beaming in from. I completely appreciate the technology is against us sometimes, but we keep trying. Up next, we've got the most beautiful fireside chat looking at system level partnerships. So really continuing on this theme. And we are being joined by the UN Foundation for that, and also the Indian Institute of Technology from Delhi, and also the Global Sustainable Development Report co-chair. So it is going to be a sort of high-level, really important piece, the next conversation. We've got 4 minutes before that starts. So 4 minutes to grab yourself a cup and off we go. Speak to you in a minute.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome, everyone, to this fireside chat as part of the Business Fights Poverty Global Goals Summit at the 78th UN General Assembly in New York. We have a very special briefing and discussion to bring you today. I'm so pleased to be here with the co-chair and both authors of an incredibly important report that launched this week, the second Global Sustainable Development Report. I'm Ilse Melngailis, and I run the Business Council for the UN. It's a program housed at the UN Foundation, and the Council is a group of companies that are very committed to working closely with the UN and other partners. Like those that work for Business Fights Poverty, they are leveraging their reach and their business models to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. As we all know from this week, the SDGs are significantly off track. And this report that we're discussing today includes, among other things, very poignant scenarios that forecast that even if at the rate of business as usual, we won't reach the SDGs by 2030 or not even by 2050. So the report that we're discussing today calls for significant action and significant transformative action if we are ever to bend the curve as much as is needed, but it also provides a roadmap for doing so. So let me now introduce our guests. and invite them to help share and help us interpret the findings and recommendations. And I will just say this is quite a gift because the report is north of 130 pages long. So in 25 minutes, we hope to convey its highlights and its key insights. So our hope for this session is that you will not only have a distillation of this important report, but also more clarity on how you can sharpen your own strategies and partnerships in the months and the years ahead. So let me introduce our speakers. I am here today with Imme Schulz, who is co-president of the Heinrich Böll Foundation and former deputy director of the German Development Institute. She's also honorary professor of the Center for Ethics and Responsibility at the Hochschule Bonn-Rhein-Sieg University. Ambuj Saigar is the Vipula and Mahesh Chaturvedi Professor of Policy Studies and the founding head of the School of Public Policy at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. Ambuj's interests broadly lie at the intersection of science, technology, innovation, and development. And Imme's background is in sociology and sustainability, but both really work at the intersection of science and policy. And science and policy is very much what this report is about. But we hope that it will also help guide investment, action, and really focus. So with that, let's get started. We really can't wait to hear from you. Thank you again so much for taking time out of this busy schedule and your busy schedule and this important week to join us. So Imme, please tell us more about the central call to action of the report and really which is to embrace transformation. What does this mean? And can you share with us what the key findings are of the report?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Ilse, for inviting us here to for this special audience and to share our insights and recommendations. So as you well said, it was clear to us when summarizing the literature on the 2030 agenda and SDG implementation, it was clear to us that reaching full implementation by 2030, and in some cases even by 2050, looks very unlikely. And at the same time, what we are seeing is that societies and economies are going through very deep transformation processes. And the whole idea of the 2030 agenda is to shape these transformations in a way that development happens, so to strengthen human development and make economies more productive and more effective in resource and energy use, so that this human development is in peace or harmony with nature and doesn't destroy the natural foundations of life anymore. And we focused on the transformation process as such to understand it better and its complexities. And what we state in our report, based on the evaluation of the literature, is that incremental or fragmented change is definitely insufficient to achieve the SDGs in the remaining 7 years or even later. So what we need is strategic approaches, all of society transformations, and we need to develop capacities for that, both in the public and in the private sector. We need to develop the ability to maintain strategic direction over many years, not only within legislators, and to build and maintain a broader societal alliance that supports these transformations, and to have strategic action that builds on synergies, and also anticipates conflicts which always accompany transformation processes, so that strategic direction and the dynamics of change are not lost by conflicts that are not managed. Maybe I leave it here and give Ambuj a chance to.
Yes, please do fill in what you'd like to highlight, Ambuj.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks again for having us here. Maybe I'll just add a few sentences to what Imme just said. I think as a report highlights, transformations have been, society is always transforming itself. So it's not that the notion of transformation is new. I think what the important point that our report makes is that these transformations can be guided and accelerated. Mm-hmm. And that requires somewhat different approach than just being, in a sense, observers or bystanders in the transformation process. Already there has been movement towards the SDGs, and clearly, I think, as you already noted, that the movement has not been fast enough. So the point really is to make the transformations more directed and accelerate them. And that requires, as Imre just said, that requires a strategic approach, but also a systematic approach. And that's why we think our report is useful, because it kind of lays out in a very clear way, unpacks the transformation process and uses that unpacking to give guidance to people onto how to manage these transformations better. I might also just add, interestingly, I think just a few days ago, the UN Climate Convention released their Global Stocktake report, the synthesis report of the Global Stocktake, which is a big effort by the UNFCCC to take stock of where we are in the climate space. And interestingly, if you read that synthesis report, the word transformation comes over and over again. So clearly, I think this is a message that is now being taken up by multiple entities, that in the end, we really need to think about transformations, and as our report says, embrace them and drive the process in a way that moves us much faster in the direction we want to go.
Thank you for clarifying that. And yeah, indeed, I do think that in the year following the SDG summit, that it's that we need to embrace this. And to me, one of the highlights of the report is this focus on how difficult transformations are. I think maybe in the past, transformations happened organically. And the big point here is that we need to push the transformations, and we need to get uncomfortable, and things are going to be challenging. And some of the capacity building that you alluded to is also very interesting, and that in itself is a transformation. And so it's the report really highlights complexity. So just for the audience, when you do look at the report, you will read about key transformations that need to happen. And the report also lays out 6, I believe, with maybe a new pathway. These build on the original 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report. And by the way, this is a report that comes out only once every 3 years. So together with the SDG Summit that we had this week, we really do hope to have a roadmap. And so, or we do have a roadmap in this report. So let's laser focus a little bit on the business audience. And maybe Ambuj, we'll start with you. What are some of the things that, as readers from the business sector, from companies that have been working really hard to align with the SDGs and authentically want to do so more and better and together with governments who are ultimately accountable for the SDGs, what should business readers be looking for and take away from the report? And I'd love to hear from both of you.
Sure. I think maybe the first thing I would actually say is business has always been part of these transformations. In fact, even if you look at the achievement of the SDGs, what really stands out is the places where we are making good progress is things like penetration of internet and penetration of cell phones. In fact, I would actually say that I think penetration of mobiles has probably been one of the fastest and deepest transformations this world has ever seen. And obviously, businesses have been right at the heart of it. So businesses are certainly a central part of the story. I think the question now is, given where we are, why is it that they must engage more deeply with this question? And I would say there are 2 reasons for that. One reason is that lack of achievement of SDGs is going to affect everyone. And therefore, it's a societal challenge, and therefore it's not good for everyone, including business, if you're failing on these goals, especially goals such as failing to address climate change or failing to address global hunger. Important also for business to recognize is that as we are transforming, there are going to be huge investments made, trillions of dollars in the transformation, whether it's
10 years of focusing on trying to sort of scale up business partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals. And Pierre, if I can come to you first, and then the other panelists, what are some of the lessons that we've learned, and what do we need to do differently?
Yeah, so I think there are three lessons that I'd share. The first is, as we think about international development, I think the private sector needs to be more intentional in embedding these issues in how they do business. So really mainstreaming sustainable development. I think there are a lot of exemplars in this space, and I think there is opportunity to do even more. So, for example, MasterCard is obviously a financial technology firm. We have a really big focus on the commercial side for financial inclusion. So how do we build products, services, and tools that really cater to the needs of the underbanked and the unbanked? And that's part of our corporate strategy because it's good for business and it's good for the world. And so I think the first lesson I would say is really embedding it into the commercial strategy of private sector companies. The second is I often find within the private sector context, it's always, the ask is always financial. You know, will you write us a check? And of course, catalytic capital, incredibly critical, but so too are the other assets that private sector can bring to bear. I think about the ability right now around data-driven decision-making. So we've done a lot of work around building the capacity of civil society to use data and really building that next cohort of data scientists who are oriented around social impact, because again, we think that's a really important function and competency. So the second would be, you know, what else can the private sector bring to bear aside from catalytic capital to help make those gains? And then the third thing I would just say is I'm finding real power. You know, there's a lot of discussion always during UNGO Week around partnerships, where I think there's such opportunity and such excitement and such track records of success are when companies partner with each other. You know, we talk a lot about public-private, which is also incredibly important, but looking at the private-private frame, how does MasterCard work with Meta, for example, on accelerating progress towards inclusive growth? And so those would be the three things that I think need to happen more so if we're going to really meet the goals of the SDGs.
Great, no, thank you. And I think your final point on these, you know, what are increasingly called pre-competitive business coalitions has enormous potential and also some real challenges, and that you know, things like antitrust laws can get in the way of companies working on a pre-competitive basis. So we've actually got to, you know, think of enabling frameworks to allow some of these more unusual partnerships. And then that importance of, you know, using data science, but also going back to your point of local knowledge and lived experiences. And you know, to harness sort of core competencies to respond is a key message, as well as the sort of your commercial value chains of companies. But Duncan, from the sort of the African sort of Futures and Foresights Forum perspective, you know, you're sort of seeing some, you know, very important sort of fresh thinking and new ideas on what we need to do to rethink partnerships. You know, what would your response be to that, or other lessons and things we need to do differently?
Well, and to the earlier point I made, I think it's clear when we're speaking actually about the LDCs and sub-Saharan Africa and what we need to do to not be considered laggards anymore. We need to ourselves chart out our way, chart out our course forward, and also look at how we can, through our own innovative procedures, try and come up with solutions that then business partnerships from outside can plug into and sort of like bring out. I'll give a case in point in terms of financial inclusion and banking the unbanked. We had MasterCard running such a program here in Kenya. And you'd see the local innovation that was coming from a local company like Safaricom went ahead to actually implement and bank the unbanked. We've had our own type of cryptocurrencies on trading on the platform that Safaricom has been running, that is M-Pesa. So we've had inclusion, financial inclusion happening from the grassroots level, but this is the gap that we need to close in on. And in terms of looking outside and looking back in, we don't require much external validation because we know we are growing a Silicon Savannah here. So what we need to do is actually map where this assistance, this capacity building, this knowledge transfer and fund management as well, because there's a lot of misappropriation and graft. We need to map the entire value chain, so to speak, and then look at how we can address our gaps and our shortcomings to achieve these goals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so that understanding the system that we're operating in, being able to map that, but also that important role, and this is where technology will play a role, of how do we get the resources and the support to the local leaders. And one doesn't want to disintermediate governments, because they have a critical role to play. But how do we try and make sure that we not only support and empower local leaders, but get the resources as efficiently and effectively and the largest amounts possible to those local initiatives and local leaders. So thank you for that. And sorry, do you want to come in again? Yeah.
I was just going to mention the importance of what you've just touched on, which is social development and social agency at that grassroots level, to ensure that then whatever innovations or whatever plugins that external businesses and partners and stakeholders can come into will actually derive the most benefit to the people who need it most.
Yeah, exactly. And then ways of amplifying those stories is crucial. Astrid, from what you're hearing, I mean, what from the UN perspective should we be doing differently?
This is, so many interesting things coming up and ideas, and this focus on local level and context is so important, because I was using the example earlier of transitions to clean energy and making this about gender equality and other things at the same time. All of that depends on the context. It's not that there's just one formula for this is what you do and you can address all these issues. It needs to be based on research and analysis within different contexts on how these links between the SDGs play out. And this, of course, if you look at the research on the SDGs, it's been growing quite a bit in recent years, of course, but it's really concentrated in wealthier countries. And this is, and the research often will draw on data from the countries that the research is in. So getting more analysis and insights into regions around the world so that there is good data and analysis that can feed into the decision-making is really important. Just one example, and there's also the question of the cost of access to data and research, because it's very high. And if you're at a wealthy university and you have access to all the resources, then that can be okay, but it's not for many people. And just looking at climate data and data on biodiversity, there's a statistic that 60% of climate data is behind a paywall and 50% of biodiversity data. And yet these are global challenges that really are important for the public good. So there's a little bit of a conflict there. And certainly businesses and the private sector have a wealth of data and research, and making that accessible for different groups and in different countries, and investing in R&D on some of these areas that are aligned with the SDGs would be really helpful in pushing things forward quickly.
I think that's a really, really important point, and highlights one of the tensions of something you said, Pearl, about companies have to utilize their commercial capabilities, their core value chains, make this part of core business, and at the same time, particularly where data is an intellectual property or key components of that. How does one make sure that public good data, there's a sort of data as a sort of public commons issue, that there's certain areas of data that large companies can and should be making more accessible to more people in a more effective way. So I think that's another sort of new type of partnership we need to be thinking about. And I'm conscious, I think we're sort of beginning to run close to our time in terms of going into discussion groups. So those sort of some of the lessons and areas where we can move forward. As we move into the discussion groups, I'd like to sort of come to each of you, and Duncan, start with you. From all the work that you do, in addition to what you've already sort of shared, are there one or two sort of key messages that you would be giving to business leaders on what we can be doing better and differently as we move forward in a call to action?
I would actually give an example of the African Futures and Foresight Forum, which is part of an unlikely partnership from the School of International Futures and the work that we've been doing with the next generation of foresight practitioners. Because we started as a sensing network for Africa, and you'd find that the intersectionality of the problems, if it's rural to urban migration, if it's health futures and food futures, all of this was culminating to a sense of a collective effort required to then, even source those stakeholders and look at them and tell them, this is where the gaps lie, and this is what we've been doing wrong, and this is what we need to do to achieve at least a substantial amount of improvement or gains towards the goals.
Great. No, thank you. And then can you say a little bit about also how you're making that information accessible to Astra's point, and you're building a sort of a seems like a remarkable network of sort of future thinkers and foresight leaders.
You focus more on sensitization, and that is outreach also, which includes workshops for implementation of this thinking, because we ideally have seen that once you get to the grassroots level and you've sensitized them, let's say on emerging technologies, it'll be easier for that change to be managed. Otherwise, you would get, of course, this disparity where people feel like this technology is not really homegrown, or they have concerns on privacy. They don't really understand what WorldCoin is doing, gathering all this data ingest with iScans. So sensitization is a big part of then filling that gap, first of all, from the African perspective. And then we can scale out into the outreach programs, which then implement most of these projects at the small scale or grassroots level. So this then allows us to map out all the challenges that we need to address, and therein lies the plugin where, of course, stakeholders and business partners from abroad and locally can then plug in.
Yeah, and come up with those joint solutions. No, thank you, Astra. Comments as we move into discussions on any other call to action, particularly for business?
Yeah, just to say that there are so many promising initiatives out there, and it's really just a matter of scale. So, identifying some of these potential solutions, whether they're technologies or, practices, and the business sector has a lot of ability, not only with, investing in these promising areas, but also shaping behavior. The example Duncan just used about people maybe not wanting to use the technology, it's not homegrown, we're not familiar with it. Shaping behaviors through, marketing or social media is hugely effective in getting people to make the choice to use something that has a lot of promise, or to, put themselves behind the promising solutions.
Yeah, great. So sort of platforms which can be individually applied. Yes, absolutely. Pearl.
I would say to the business leaders that are listening is, I think the private sector, a collective we, can do a better job of expressing what we need to make further progress. I often find there's so much pressure every day this week. The private sector is going to be the key. It is incredibly critical, but the private sector also needs help. One of the things Jane and I were talking about is we need a new set of incentives, and we need to think creatively about what the new set of incentives are to really make the systems change that we need to get to where we're going. And so I think I feel like we're taking a lot on, which is great, but we also need to be vocal about what we need to be able to make some of these critical shifts, which are going to really reimagine the way we do businesses.
Great. No, thank you. And I think from my side, reflecting on those comments, there's sort of four key messages. One is this, even the term scale. We absolutely need scale, but I'm realizing there's sort of two types of scale that we need. We need sort of collective scale, whether it's pre-competitive business coalitions of an entire industry coming together, or it's Doug, you mentioned roadmaps, sort of like national roadmaps where business and civil society are working with government to identify food systems roadmap or an SDG roadmap, or actually nationally determined contributions. So we need scale a large-scale collective basis, but we also need scale in terms of distributed local level empowerment and leadership, and not thousands, but millions of small enterprises, along value chains, small community groups, and individual leaders and entrepreneurs, with very strong focus on inclusion, on gender and youth and other types of inclusion, that are able to be empowered and supported by those large-scale platforms and initiatives, but are actually able to also be context-specific, and really working at the grassroots level to deliver. And then the scale there is millions of flowers blooming and coming up with something more than we could each do if it was just on our own. So that's one sort of takeaway. The second key takeaway, I think, is how do we make sure that these coalitions really are mobilizing the core competencies and capabilities and ecosystems of the partners. So from a business perspective, and corporate philanthropy is important. It can be very catalytic from a funding perspective, but it's each company really thinking through those core commercial value chain capabilities, business partnerships, and how do we mobilize that to achieve the scale. And part of that is sort of partnerships along value chains with the local smaller and medium-sized enterprises that are part of global value chains. So that sort of scale, core competencies and capability mobilization. I think third, an increasing focus on responsibility and accountability. And transparency, responsibility and accountability and transparency of these initiatives, and particularly how new technologies and new partnerships are being deployed. And so we're hearing a lot about business partnerships needed for policy advocacy, to change the enabling environment. And yet there's a lot of distrust with corporate lobbying. And corporate lobbying has its place, traditional corporate, but what are these new policy advocacy coalitions that are needed, but that are transparent and accountable? And how are we being accountable in terms of the impacts of the partnerships? And then I think the fourth point is this importance of sort of data and sort of science, evidence-based, but also local knowledge-based and indigenous knowledge-based, community knowledge-based, as well as the sort of technologies that we have that provides a sort of evidence base that can then ladder up to national and global policies. So that sort of scale at a collective level and at a distributed local and contextual leadership perspective. There's harnessing core capabilities and competencies, sort of accountability and transparency for results, and including these trade-offs, so that being intersectional about the positive co-benefits of environmental, social initiatives, but also some of the risks and trade-offs. And then being really rigorous and data-driven, but data not just so-called expert data and technically sophisticated data, but data in terms of lived experiences and finding ways to link those and making sure communities get access to the data, but the data also recognizes and draws from the critical lived experiences of local leaders. So thank you very much. I think we'll all be coming back right at the end to make some closing remarks. But Duncan, Astrid, and Pale, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you also to our colleague Amanda Gardner, the head of ESG at Meta, for hosting us. And I'll now hand back to Zahid and Yvette to give us our marching orders for the next part of the session. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, what an interesting, fascinating panel and discussion that was. And amazing to have Nairobi joining us too. So Nairobi and London, New York are going to head off into their separate groups now, and we're going to do our breakout sessions. If Zahid stands in front of the camera, we'll presume he wants to speak to me, but otherwise not. So if you haven't already, this is a bit of a kind of immersive experience and opportunity. So do pop your cameras on if you feel comfortable to, and you can change your view into grid view. Sometimes that makes it a bit easier. This is a bit of an opportunity to have a conversation. Clearly, everything we've heard today, and also, quite frankly, across this week leading up to this summit as well, we know that we are off track. We have to think about things differently. And I bet you might have some experience from another part of your world, or indeed from the work that you're already doing, to look at how we can better partner, collaborate, create coalitions, quite frankly, just make a difference at a bigger level, at a lasting level. So what we're going to do now is, in a smaller group, we're going to have 2 groups online and 2 groups, some groups in Nairobi and groups in New York as well. Each group has a moderator who will be joining your session to lead out that conversation. We've got a couple of questions, but really it's just that opportunity to actually connect. This is our last session for the Global Goals Summit. So this is your last chance to meet other people, to get your points across, to be part of this. And we do have each of your oral sessions will result in an insights paper. So we would love your points of view put across so that can be put into that insights paper, and that will be given back to you. So sort of the ultimate pyramid scheme. You put in your information, you get a whole load of ideas and thoughts back. So without further ado, I'm going to open up the breakout room. So Alan is going to be leading the breakout room in the other place, over there, for the online guys. So Alan, off you go. If you can see a pop-up coming up onto your screen, do follow that lead. For those guys who are in Nairobi, now's your time to go and hang out with your room, the rest of your tables now. So I'm going to pop you guys on mute and to say, see you in a bit. We'll be back in 25 minutes around then. And for Annabelle, you've got this fabulous gang here for you to hang out with. So Annabelle, over to you in terms of how you like to run this session. I can see Michael's all lined up too. I can also see colleagues as well who are sort of hanging out in this session. So Annabelle, over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our last breakout session of the week. My goodness. And it's great to see some faces popping up as well. Please do turn on your cameras if you are able to. We don't mind about small children running around. We don't mind about cats walking across the table. We're a very friendly bunch. And it's also, we're quite informal as well. So please do. It's lovely to see some faces. Hi, Nicole. Hi, Sylvie. Hi, Ricky. Oh, hi, Michael. Good to see you again. I can actually see your face this time. We had some issues with your screen in the last session, didn't we? So it's really nice to see you. Great. So on this session, oh, hi, Joseph. Thanks for turning your camera.
Came in 5 minutes before the end of the previous, but that's okay. I'm going to respond to part of the question that you asked, and I'll share my perspective as I've done doctoral research on innovation and cross-sectoral partnerships. I teach in social innovation, design and social innovation, and I'm in Ottawa, Canada. And the question I'd like to respond to is what potential exists for future collaboration. So I'll tell you the gap that I see and that I'm working on. And this is partnerships between the academic sector and the social sector. And in order to translate theories into practice. I mean, there have been a lot of examples through this conference or to the summit of how this is happening globally. But here where I am, I see still a lot of silos, disciplinary silos in academia, no sense of accountability for results or impacts of research on communities. And then in the social sector or social purpose organizations, some difficulty collaborating with one another and sometimes competing for funds, and also accessing knowledge. And so that's what I'm really interested in, and what I'm working on is actually a social enterprise model kind of platform in order to facilitate that mutual learning and partnering in order to achieve the kinds of changes that everyone has been talking about here in this forum, which is great. So that's my contribution.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And as somebody who's I was doing a PhD and now I'm back in the world of business, as it were, but I'm so passionate about that intersection of the two, because it feels like it's actually quite hard to find roles that bridge both those things and to have a foot in both camps. So yes, please sign me up for the bridging of the kind of academic and the practical. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Nicole, I saw you around from the Women's Refugee Commission. We would love to speak to you if you would like to.
Oh, hi, everybody. So I think our main SDG is gender equality, but also health and well-being. And our mission is to protect the lives and support the most marginalized, women and girls, or women and children. But our definition is very broad in the sense that our feminist definition and gender lens is we focus on the most forgotten, most marginalized people. So it could be a man, you could be 80, you could have a disability, you could have been subject to gender-based violence as a male. So we work with LGBTQ plus diverse subject, we work with adolescent girls, we work with people with disabilities, and we bring them to global fora and get their voices heard. We're applied research and advocacy, and we do what Sylvia was saying. We really do bridge academia. We build evidence. We're applied research, and we work through partners, local partners mostly now. But anyway, so to answer your question, what partnerships? I agree 100% with what Sylvie said. We are in the humanitarian sector, but there's a message that we are trying to get out is that you can't just focus on the humanitarian sector. You have to, in order for real lasting change, the development sector needs to link with the humanitarian sector, because we prepare the ground in the humanitarian sector, but then something else needs to take over. And unfortunately, as the Global Humanitarian Report has pointed out, the authors of the report, the one issued this year in June, it's pointed out that often the countries that are facing the most crisis right now, they don't have any development aid. And then when you bring in the private sector, which is absolutely critical to fund innovation where donor governments or regular foundations don't fund. And a lot of those donors are moving away from international organizations, which is the right thing to do, but they're not doing it the right way. And we know, because we work with partners on the ground in conflict, in protracted crises, et cetera, around the world. So I think those are just the key points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicole. Really appreciate it. And I'm seeing that we've now got a list in the chat. Thank you to my lovely assistant, Tamara, who's popped that in. So I will go down the list in that order, and I will skip back to Michael next, because he was at the front. But I do want to point out that we've had some comments. Thank you very, very much to Pat and also Rakaya, who just introduced themselves in the chat. Pat says that she's not really able to participate kind of face to face, but she'd like to see more in terms of public-private partnerships and big and small suppliers partnerships. And then we need like a roadmap to connect potential partners together, and could not agree more with that. So thank you so much for that comment. And also we've had Rakaya joining from Germany, which is amazing. Thank you very much. So Michael, over to you. If you'd like to have a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, the work that you're doing, and any thoughts on partnering for the SDGs. Hi, we just need to take you off mute, Michael.
You're talking about me?
I am, yes.
Oh, okay, because I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, okay. I could just see you when you're at the top of my list now. So,
no, but that I'd be very glad. I'm doing a very large, audacious global program called Chaotic ESG, starting in the Middle East. And chaotic is the term that was used in 1970 when Visa was created, chaos and order. And because SDGs and ESGs are so unknown by most people in the world and most business people, what we're trying to do is to create a global entity that can be working with very large multinational companies to enable them to have their brand associated with very large global growing efforts to do things that are in the ESG and SDG space. And that's why I call it chaotic, because there's no plans. It's going to happen chaotically around the world. And it's something that's just like a dream for me. So I'm very, very excited about it.
Oh,
and I have the map of the SDGs right behind me on my shelf.
Oh, so you do. Oh, that's
so I
wonderful.
look at it all day, every day.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we wish you all the best of luck with that. And please do, if you want to put anything in the chat, any websites or links or anything.
Business Fights Poverty is going to write me a check for $3 million. That's what I heard.
I have to check our bank account. I'm not sure. I think that might bounce, Michael. We'll get told off for saying that. Right, wonderful. So next, I think we have Hesham, if you are there and able to participate. I saw you a minute ago. Here you are. There you are. Please have the floor, sir.
Thanks for participation. Actually, I mean, that's I got like a low battery, so I'm going to have a charger. But anyway, I mean, if you asked me about like the most important goals for the SDGs, I would say the first and the last one, which is like the alleviating poverty. And in my opinion, this couldn't be happen without having all the partnerships. I remember that actually while we were adopting the MDGs previously, and how these global partnerships and how it was claimed that the achieving MDGs is the government responsibility. So I would say that now it's obvious that it's not only the government responsibility. However, it's like the people's responsibility, because the damage, when it happens, and all of us will be affected anyways. So my question is, what's in it for the business to be really partner in achieving the SDGs? I would say that they are doubting very much about, because it's very hard to the business sector, and I'm considering as a social entrepreneur, like part of this private sector, it's very hard to the private sector to be involved and to materialize the results that could be achieved. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hesham, and could not agree more. Ricky, let's come to you. How are you doing today?
Good afternoon, Annabelle. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so grateful to be in this space again. I think there've been some wonderful discussions today. I wanted to add my piece on some of the questions you've raised. Number one, a company that is doing great work in terms of contributing to the SDGs. I'm not sure they're going to be happy with me naming them, but I'm going to say Woolworths, and not so much as a company that I partner with, but as a company that I am a customer for. So they do a lot in the way of environmental through the products. And one of the things they did is they shifted from plastic bags to little carry-on bags. And then I realized I was having this huge collection of these carry bags. And I wrote to them and I said to them, why don't you have a way for us to hand the bags back to you and recycle the bags? And they grocery delivery also uses paper bags. And I asked for that. And within less than a month, they'd actually taken the suggestion up. So they're very, very responsive. And I know that they're doing great work in a number of spaces, which takes me to the kind of interesting partnerships, unlikely partnerships. I think that it is really possible to do partnerships with competitors, because if we really want to find the most catalytic and creative solutions within a particular context or space, it helps to work with with all of the players in the space, all the competitors in the space. So, for example, if you want to look at gender-based violence in the retail space, it doesn't help you to look at just one business. It helps if many businesses are looking at it together, so you can understand like what are the different contextual needs, and therefore you can really innovate a solution that is affordable and accessible across businesses. So if we're kind of trying to build catalytic solutions, we do need to work with our competitors. And then the last partners I would say are interesting partners to look at is the idea of partners who are experts, who are not necessarily NGOs. I heard a lot of businesses talk about getting expertise through NGO partnerships. And NGO partnerships by their nature have uneven power, right? So you're partnering with the very people that you're funding. Whereas there's immense expertise out in a lot of different spaces. And it was interesting for me to see the investment in that kind of expertise in northern companies without that kind of investment in southern companies, if I can use that distinction. In southern companies, we think of NGO investment. We don't think of business investment. So I heard a lot of investment around products and services and production, but not around the people who bring people together and who help people to think and who help people to innovate. And so I think a good area to look at is this catalyzing expertise of knowing how to bring people together, knowing how to help people work together so we can innovate more and more and have more and more transformational solutions that people own themselves, as opposed to we've learned about it in one context, we think you should do it in another context.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Ricky. And I love that the way that you expressed about and sort of investing in the people, like the people who bring people together, who help people think. And that's, that's what we try and do at Business Fights Poverty. But, we need to be doing it all over the place, and we need it to be like a common way of working, I think. And, there's loads of amazing organizations out there that do that. It's just about finding them and, scaling that up as well, definitely. And it's like that mindset shift, isn't it, in the way that we work. Thank you so much. So I can see that there are also other people introducing themselves in the chat. Hi, Sadia, you're from Nigeria. It's great to please pop into the chat, introduce yourself, share your LinkedIn details or email addresses if you'd like to. Do just get connecting. I'm going to go to Joseph next, but I just want to say before that, we're going to finish in about 6 minutes. So if there's anybody who particularly wants to speak, please use the wavy sign, send me a message in the chat, turn your camera on if you can, just so that I kind of come to you next. But Joseph, would you like to speak to us?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending this great summit. No poverty, zero hunger, climate, gender equality, our soil. We've destroyed half of our soil in the last 50 years, our pollinators, biodiversity. Interestingly, the saving grace can be the smallholder farmer. Rodale Institute did a report that if we return to regenerative or organic farming, the way our grandparents and great-grandparents did, that as a great carbon sequestration system can actually sequester more than 100% of all human carbon outputs on an annual basis. Our solution is the give back market, where we use a fair trade distribution model and a sort of social purpose Amazon, if you will, and we carve off the retail portion and give it to charities, agencies that are working to alleviate food insecurity, like the World Food Program, local food banks, a protein project through the unions here in Vancouver, British Columbia. I invite you to visit combathunger.today to kind of cruise around and find out what we're doing. We started with 400 farmers. It's working. Our platform is almost complete. Consumer and corporate markets are huge. If we simply change what we buy and where we buy it, we can get better food. We can include farmers in the supply chain, partner with the people that grow the best organic spices and other artisanal agricultural products, and carve off the retail portion, which could be from 35 to 50%. Paul Newman's Own, I don't know if everyone around the world's heard of it, but he's contributed about $500 million, the late Paul Newman, that is, through his Newman's Own sauces. And he was doing that at 5% of wholesale. We're now talking about 35 to 50% of retail. And so if you look at the $24 billion organic spice market, and you take 5-10% of that market, carve off that portion, you were talking about an impactful way to spend your consumer dollars. And then corporate gifting, for example, a $240 billion industry in the United States alone, that can not only lift the smallholder farmers by shrinking the supply chain to the minimum, farmer, platform, customer, It gives enormous sums of money to fight poverty and hunger while you're preserving your soil, you're protecting your pollinators, you're promoting biodiversity, you promote gender equality. For 50 to 70% of smallholder farmers are women and girls who are not represented justly, equitably in neither revenue nor ownership, yet they tend to pay the bills. If you do your research on it, you lend them money, they pay you back. So I think we have a real opportunity to do very interesting things by changing the supply chain, shrinking it, and then using AI, for example, to enable small farmer groups to actually show the world, here's what our so many thousands of hectares of the collective growing is doing to sequester carbon. That then gives them a tool to reach out to financial institutions that they normally can't, because there's two things they get. They can say, here's what we're doing. We can go into the carbon market. There's not a big amount of money in that. But the consumer can connect directly with farmers, and using AI, you could have presentations. A high school student promoting zero hunger as a zero hunger ambassador, is what we call them, could bring a Ugandan farmer, a Cambodian pepper farmer, into the boardrooms of America and London and around the world and say, well, let's talk to the farmers that are growing our food. And then you simply create an atmosphere of buying directly to farmer groups. Again, carve off the retail portion, raise a lot of money, and help climate change and other SDG goals. So that's what we're all about. And we're really looking to form partnerships with everybody, because this is, as my grandma used to say, many hands make light work. Thank you.
Oh, I love that. I love that there's wisdom from grandma to end the session as well. That's what we all need. So thank you so much for sharing that. This has been, thank you so much for sharing what you're up to and the different sort of insights and priorities that you have for partnership. I think, yeah, just as always with these sessions, we just cover so much breadth. There's so much sort of experience in the room, and thank you to everybody that's been listening as well. Oh, apparently we might have another 5 minutes. Let me just find out.
Sorry, Annabelle. We'll find out. Naughty people who are face to face.
Oh, okay. They can't get back in their seats. All right, no worries. Well, we can keep going. We can keep having this chat.
Okay. You guys are having a great chat.
Katie, I might pick on you actually, seeing as you're here. Or are you doing something else? What about you? What do you think about partnerships?
I'll share. I think I had an epiphany. So I was doing the briefing with, there's an amazing woman called Ajita who was one of our speakers yesterday during the Unreasonable programme. And I was doing the briefing with her, which put my hands up, was outside a swimming pool while my children were swimming, slightly inappropriate for a business school. And she was talking about during the pandemic having to come together to solve big problems, which obviously during the pandemic it was all chaotic. And she is a coalition builder. So she's a community kind of builder, but very sort of slightly similar to Business Fights Poverty. And I think my epiphany is that for so long, if you look at all the kind of information and background on innovation, for entrepreneurship, it's all about three horizons of McKinsey's innovation. You have to be an entrepreneur for small businesses or scale up businesses, or you can innovate within. There's no data, background, information, learning and thinking on like actually the power of coalitions, the how do you build coalitions, but actually to unlock them for system change impact. And so my epiphany, my aha moment for this week has been, we need to better understand it and take it out of the realms of, oh, look, aren't they lovely little community builders, and put it into how do we genuinely make coalitions work for impact so that each person has and knows what their role is without stepping on other people's toes, without having to hide what they're doing behind the screen, you know? And I think that was my kind of real moment. What about yourself, Annabelle?
So I'm just looking at all the chat and all the joining up and information that's going there. Thank you so much. And please do kind of keep talking after this event as well. as we've been talking, actually, I came across something earlier this year called the Social Change Ecosystem Map, which is actually, I think, put together for more of a kind of individual level, sort of how do you find your place if you're someone that wants to get involved in social action? You know, what's your personality? What are your kind of gifts and where do you feel most comfortable? And it sort of sets out all these different roles, like storytellers who kind of help work on the narrative, and weavers who bring all the different people together, and the experimenters who are busy overdoing all the crazy things, seeing what works and what doesn't. I can pop it in the chat, actually. I'll just pop a link in now. But it really got me thinking about how maybe we could apply that to different organizations as well, because we need basically the research they've done has showed that to make social change happen, you need all of these different people working in all of these different roles, like, you know, visionaries is another one of them, and also like the builders. They're like really kind of tech people who do all the tech and make things happen, and the admin people that support, and, you know, everyone has a role to play in this. And so I wonder, you know, on that systems perspective, whether when we're forming partnerships for systemic change, we can almost, you know, use that as a map for, you know, who are our guides and who are our builders and who are our weavers in this coalition, to try and sort of really push the systemic change that we want to see. So I just leave that with you. But I mean, I found it quite useful just for me, to be honest, in terms of, you know, where I feel like I should be working. And I feel like I'm a bit of a weaver, which is why I'm at Business Fights Poverty having these kind of conversations. But yeah, no, it's been, oh, and I see someone else has seen it as well, Sylvie. Great. No, please do share it far and wide, because I think it's important that everyone understands their role within the kind of the enormous challenges that we've got ahead of us. So thank you very much.
Definitely do get sharing. And if there's anything else that you guys want to share, this chat is, you know, we are a community. We are only as good as the support we can offer to one another. And I don't know about yourselves, but actually sometimes it does feel as though you're a bit lonely out in I feel a bit lonely and pushing water uphill, and you're trying to do something that's really hard. And sometimes you sort of look around you, and if you believe all the news, you think, oh God, everything's really, really horrible. But there aren't. You come and hang out with this lot, you guys, and you're like, oh, we're all in it together. We're all trying, and we're all here to support one another. So if nothing else, as a takeaway that when you go back to whatever you're doing in your day job or day life, we're here. We've got your back. Just drop us a line at any time. And as I mentioned earlier on, we will be back for our next summit. So this is the last session for this event this week, but we will be back in December for the Business Fights Poverty Global Climate Justice Summit, really looking at that sort of intersection, or the work that is putting people at the heart of climate action, because fundamentally climate change is a massive human problem, human issue, human challenge. So we'd love to welcome you. That'll be first week in December, and in that one, because the COP, which is the climate conference, is taking place in Dubai, we'll be in Dubai for that. So if you want to or happen to be in town, we'd love to see you. If you want to, like Nairobi, run or host a bit of a breakout and have your own mini session, we would love to help you to make that happen. We can come and make that piece, so you can bring all your mates together and have a bit of a breakout of your own. And so just drop us a line at any time. Very, very happy to help in any way. And likewise, Business Fights Poverty, as I said, because we're a community, if at any point we can share your insights for you, you want to write us a bit of a blog or an article, we can get that into our monthly newsletter. We'd love to see it. We want to publish and hear from everybody around the world. So, don't be shy. We aren't too scary, I hope. Sometimes Annabelle's really scary, but most of the time we're right. So yeah, do get in touch, do be part of it, do lean in and get involved. Now I think I can see Yvette looking as though she's nearly ready. She's on stage and trying to back it out now. Hi Yvette, how's your conversation? And I can also see the guys in Nairobi were online 2 seconds ago, and then they've disappeared too. So Yvette, over to you, and I'll go and rustle up the Nairobi team. Oh, Yvette, we need you to turn on your microphone. Here we go. Nice man. It's going to sort her out. No.
How's that, Katie?
Yeah, we got you.
They probably can hear me now in the room a bit better. So yes, we're back live with the online audience. We've got Nairobi online. They've been doing what we've been doing just now, breaking out into smaller conversations. And I understand that each table has somebody may or may not have somebody to share some thoughts. So if you could, if you are the designated person, please come here to the front of the stage, and Katie will call on us as and when your guys online are ready, Nairobi is ready. You decide, Katie.
Yeah, we're gonna hustle it backwards and forwards. So
okay,
I'm going to,
wonderful.
Oh, there you go. Well done. It looks like New York's getting settled. There's a bit of camera. Hi, Nairobi. Nairobi, can you hear me? Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
Yeah. Would you mind introducing yourself? I'm Katie. Nice to meet you. And
it's a pleasure.
Share a bit about how your session was.
All right. Hi, Katie. My name is Linda Kasina. I work with Nurisha Trust here in Nairobi, Kenya. Greetings from a very rainy Nairobi. I think you can see everyone is pretty warm here. So our session was fascinating, very good discussions on both sides. So the first thing we talked about is how business can partner, how business can influence what's happening like at the grassroots level. So here we had very exciting examples. We looked at examples of shared value. Basically, we're able to highlight companies like Safaricom PLC, who have been able to set up a foundation where they work with the communities to help the communities. So this was really interesting that the foundation goes to the community, seeks to solve the problems of the community with the community, basically meeting them at their point of need. We had examples from Bayer, and Bayer is doing a lot in terms of agriculture. And what they're doing basically is training the farmers, helping the farmers to get access to the information that they need, helping the farmers to get the right kind of seeds, making sure they don't get counterfeit products. And that was really interesting. We heard from Hand in Hand and the work that they're also doing, setting up commercial villages, and especially with women. They said women make up mostly 60% of the farmers in this country, and mostly at a small scale level. So they're really helping these women to set up commercial villages, giving them access to credit, giving them access to, they gave us an example of chicks where they need to rear chicken. So they give them access to affordable products and resources. So that was really interesting. We had an example of a company called Best Energy, and they are working together with a TVET, a college called Kibondeni, and with Movenpick Hotel. And basically what they're doing is setting up a green TVET space within this college and mirroring what the students will have to do when they go into industry. So it was really exciting. And I think more than anything, what we're able to see is the potential for partnerships among businesses, the potential for partnerships among different stakeholders. And what was really highlighted is that all these stakeholders need to go to the ground, that they need to be able to communicate with the people at the grassroots. They need to be able to really map out what's needed, like what's really required, what do the people really need, and work with them. But I think it was very inspiring and very encouraging to see the scope of what's being done so far and what more can be done.
Beautiful. And you reminded me also, Hand in Hand, watch this space. Up later, I'm going to post our next Social Impact Pioneers podcast. Say that very fast and it will tongue tie you. And we'll be getting that up online because Hand in Hand have just recorded a fantastic podcast around exactly that. So women entrepreneurs and how to really unlock the empowerment and power of men, fun enough. I'm going to turn next to New York. I can see 3 people lined up on their kind of super cool funky chairs. New York, who would like to go first? Please do introduce yourselves and share a little about the session that you have just been part of. New York, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I was handed the microphone, so I'm going first. My name is Veronica Goncharova. I work on the Business Council for the UN from the UN Foundation. Thank you, Business Fights Poverty and Meta, for having us here today. We talked about some great partnerships. Those we discussed. We had an example from Anglo-American partnership with unions during the 80s in South Africa, protecting workers against HIV stigma and reducing HIV/AIDS deaths. We had an example of social media sites working with social entrepreneurs to get important messaging out. And that's an example of using the core competencies of business to get to use ad space for positive messaging. We had a great example from our friends from Tanzania and Kenya who shared partnerships between citizens and community saving schemes. We had partnerships between the UN and young people to collect the voices and experiences of young people in East Africa, to give them a voice and to push governments to stay committed to the shared experiences of young people and getting that messaging across. Ilza from BCUN shared how companies push governments to vocalize their commitments and to drive investments during COP27 when they showed leadership. And they said, this is what we're doing at COP27, and they forced governments to vocalize that as well. And then our friends at Meta, Meta and Google, of course, the example working with the UN to combat misinformation during COVID. I think that we will see similar efforts during the election next year, so which will be extremely crucial. And lastly, business and policymakers, an example from SC Johnson, working to pass stricter plastic regulation. So that would help level the playing field between businesses and also force companies like SC Johnson to reduce their plastic use, but also spread that to other business communities. So thank you very much.
Lovely. Fantastic. We will turn now to Annabelle, who's online. Don't worry, New York, we're going to come back to you. And then we'll come to Duncan, who's in Nairobi as well. So Annabelle, if you want to go first.
Thanks very much, Katie. Oh my goodness, I'm struggling to keep it snappy, but I'll do my best. So I think we highlighted the need to have, systems change and to have those kind of well thought out strategic coalitions for system change in terms of, who do we need there, what organizations, what roles do they need to be playing? But particularly we need the people who can help us, join together, who can help us think and innovate and have that time to kind of change the way that we're doing things. Also looking for levers. For example, smallholder farmers, if you work with them, you can have, huge impacts across many different SDGs simultaneously. So where are those focus points where we can really push things forwards in lots of different directions? There was a call for lots of sector level collaboration between people who might be competitors at maybe a pre-competitive level. Also between kind of more theoretical academic and then practice-based communities, keeping an eye on sort of power relationships and partnerships, particularly between companies and NGOs. There was a point about maybe partnering with consumers as well. There was a lovely example of somebody who'd made some suggestions to a company to do something slightly differently, and they'd listened and sort of changed the way that they operate to help with recycling and other things. So, how can you partner better with your consumers? Part of that might be the way that we communicate. ESG isn't particularly, it's technical language, it's not very accessible. So how do we bring in consumers as key partners? And very lastly, just keeping hold of that motivation of, why the SDGs were put in place in the first place. That real focus on ending poverty and hunger and creating peace and prosperity for everybody.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. So I'm going to move back to our room in New York, and then I will go to Duncan in Nairobi. So New York, please, next person, please to introduce yourselves, and what did you find from your group?
Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline, and I'm with Amref Health Africa. I work with Amref Health Innovations, which is a nonprofit, which is a social enterprise within Amref Health Africa, which is a nonprofit. And it is the largest public health nonprofit in Africa. In our group, it's very good to hear that a lot of the things that we discussed are similar within the groups, but I'll focus on 4 things. The first one is around trust and the importance of trust when looking at partnerships. And there was a great example given around when business comes together and they're in partnership and they put their logos next to each other. And if there's something that happens within one of those businesses that is trust or ethics related, how it influences the rest of the businesses and how it is likely going to be harder to look at partnerships as we move forward. So how do we mitigate for that? The second one was around intersectionality that was also spoken about in the panel this morning. And I think one example that was given from one of the youth from Ethiopia was how business investing in quality education is good for business, because what you're looking at is how do you build a pipeline to employability for your own organization. And then the third one was around focus, and how do we select issues that we can focus on, and it's related to the fourth point, that we can focus on for the long haul. So not just investing in an issue for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but looking at it and say, if we're talking about health futures and systems level change, this is not going to happen in a year or two. It will not happen in 5 years. So how do we make investments in these issues for the long run? So that's it from our group.
Cool. Thank you very much. So hopefully we've got Duncan, I think, will be able to join us from the Nairobi gang. There he is. Hi, Duncan.
Hi, Anna.
How was your session?
Our session was actually quite insightful. We've shared some ideas, bounced around, and a few things came out actually. And one of them is what we earlier discussed in terms of understanding where the current can we say, in terms of Africa actually, because most of us here represented in Kenya, we actually look at what is the gap, what is the bridging the gaps actually that can help us then address these issues. And one of the things that came out was, for example, behavioral change, communication, and of course these roadmaps that can then sort of like chart a course for how businesses can then come and plug in at the grassroots social level. So yeah, I think those are the things that came out. Also on the co-creation and collaboration between partnerships and partners in businesses. This can help us also achieve most of these goals that we're looking to achieve halfway through the goals. Halfway through the period of time. Yeah.
We're trying, Duncan. We keep trying. We're all working on it. Thank you. That's brilliant. I want to bring in Alan next, who I think is online, and then we'll move back to New York before bringing in Amanda. So Alan, are you there? How was your conversation?
Hi, Katie. Thanks so much. We had a really rich discussion, and we talked about how unlikely partnerships between businesses and others can help advance the SDGs. And a couple of really great points came out. I think one thing I'd like to highlight is how oftentimes one type of organization is needed to act as a glue to bring different actors together to be able to solve these systemic issues. So that was really interesting. We also talked about how business has a unique superpower for advocacy and awareness building. So that's really something that helps in this area. We also talked about peer-to-peer learning and the importance of having these face-to-face conversations to be able to move the needle forward. And two other points I'd like to bring up and that our group talked about needing more of is businesses need safe spaces to be vulnerable. And businesses also need more de-risking of opportunities to be able to enter these private-public partnerships. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alan. That's brilliant. And then moving back to the room in New York. Hello, sir. Would you like to introduce yourself? How was your conversation?
Thank you. I'm Anurag. I'm the head of corporate purpose at EssilorLuxottica, and I also head the foundation for EssilorLuxottica. We had a great discussion. Some themes which came out. One was that businesses respond best to demands from some specific groups, customers, shareholders, employees, and then we also added competitors. If the drivers are coming from these stakeholders, then businesses are naturally prompted to act. There is also a need for us to make SDGs more relatable and demystify them so that consumers can understand, and therefore they know what to ask for and they know how to evaluate their choices, and that will then prompt businesses to act. We had excellent examples of and great representation, a very diverse representation from consumer goods to sanitary appliances to the largest e-commerce player in the world, and interesting themes on how businesses are actually partnering with competitors, creating truly purpose-driven brands that consumers are actually willing to pay a premium for, to creating supply chains where businesses are contributing and investing in developing local suppliers and distributors to create a unique advantage, competitive advantage. So yeah, so I don't know. I hope that I captured everything which was discussed, and thank you. It was a great discussion.
Oh my goodness. And just shows the depth of who we're hearing from. I mean, online, zooming around the world, this is completely incredible, to the joys of technology, the learnings from lockdown, how to make this all work. I'm going to bring Jane back onto the stage. Jane, where are you?
Joining.
Hello, hot footing.
Hello, thanks, everyone. As we sort of start to wrap up from our side, I'd like to call on Payal and Astra to join me again. And Astra, to be great from the UN perspective, based on what you've heard. Any final call to action or takeaways and reflections from your perspective?
I mean, it was a really great conversation, and one thing that kind of has come up a few times is just these are really complex challenges. And I'm hopeful that from the UN, we can contribute with the convening power of bringing all kinds of stakeholders together and highlighting these issues. So just to, we're a year away, but invite everyone to keep track of the high-level political forum on sustainable development that takes place every July, with the purpose of convening all kinds of different stakeholders to take stock of progress on the SDGs, but also share knowledge and examples and information that can be useful to really drive progress. And this will be even more important for the next 7 HLPFs that will take place.
Great, Noel. Thank you for that. And I was sort of struck by something yesterday. Governments are doing their voluntary national reviews. Cities are beginning to do voluntary national reviews on the Sustainable Development Goals. It occurred to me that corporate sustainability reports and SDG reports are corporate voluntary reviews, and we should be thinking of that, more creatively. But Kyle, any closing comments from your side?
Yeah, look, I know this week has been a lot of talk about the headwinds and the fact that we're not on track. I think I leave this discussion much more heartened because there's so much happening. There are so many fantastic initiatives, so many fantastic programs. I think what we need to do next is figure out a way to map all of them, to understand what is happening and who is doing what, where the financial flows are, what the evidence is, what the learnings are, and then learn to prioritize which ones we really want to double down on. So I leave much more optimistic than I came, but I do think the work ahead of us is to really understand how we prioritize and how we consolidate.
Great, Noel, thank you. And I would now like to bring in Amanda Gardner, who is head of ESG at Meta, who is our host today, but couldn't be with us in person. Amanda, great to have you with us virtually. And I know you've been listening in, any closing reflections and comments from your side?
Sure. Can you hear me, first of all?
We can.
Amazing. So I just want to say, I'm Amanda. I lead ESG at Meta. I am so very sad to not be there with all of you in person today. I got ill overnight and I just couldn't make it. So that said, one of the many, many reasons I love working with Business Fights Poverty on events and on advocacy is because of their intentional efforts to provide opportunities for many, many more voices to come into the room. And that's allowed me to join you online today. So thank you for that. And I want to thank Zahid, Yvette, Katie, and the whole team who are there, as well as United Nations Foundation and ILZA for being amazing partners, for helping put this together with me. I love working with you. Another very special shout out to Jane Nelson and our speakers. Jane knows more about this topic than anyone else I know. And so it's a precious gift to have your time and your insights on this panel. So thank you. And speakers, I've loved listening to you, even if off camera. I also hope you all get a chance to meet some of my colleagues who are probably in the room before you go. But maybe just a few reflections based on what I was able to hear. Payal mentioned before the breakout sessions, accountability and transparency, and Jane, you just mentioned reporting. You know, there's been, in my role, I've been facing, as many of you have, an explosion of efforts to develop more robust reporting mechanisms, efforts to develop more regulation on ESG. I really, look, part of those efforts include requirements for companies to conduct things like materiality assessments, risk assessments, human rights due diligence assessments, and all of those processes can really help companies focus in on where they can have the greatest impact and where they have things to do. I think companies can do more to start integrating those processes now, not waiting for regulation. So I just want to plug that, because I think it will help us all to understand where the connections are between those risks and opportunities and the SDGs. I will say that in my opinion, the SDGs haven't been a central enough part of the conversation around regulation. They're not necessarily aligned in these new disclosures. So what can we do in the next couple of years as they start to come down the line to ensure there are mechanisms for making that alignment as companies start to disclose and do more and better, hopefully. The other thing I wanted to pick up on from earlier was the integration into strategy. We developed our very first ESG approach, our very first ESG team, our very first ESG report this year called our Responsible Business Practices Report. And we articulated our approach for the first time in July in that report. As we continue as Meta to build out that framework and to strengthen it, we will be looking closely at the KPIs we're setting and how they align, not just at the goal level to the SDGs, but to the target level. My observation has been that the companies that do this best go beyond looking at that goal level of good health and better education, but go deeper into target setting and aligning with the very specific targets around the SDGs, and then regularly reporting their contribution. So that's my second point. And then maybe lastly, I'll say just on the collaboration and collective action piece, getting beyond individual company brands and finding ways to address all of these SDG challenges as teams and across sectors. I think too many companies are still doing their own thing. And I know people mentioned that we need to build on what exists instead of shiny new things. And I am really hopeful in that regard. There are lots more collective action initiatives. Jane mentioned some of them. There are things like the Business Coalition on Inequality. There are coalitions on responsible AI, which we're starting to be part of. These are really important. There is a lot to plug into. And I think as a community, we're getting smarter about scale. So that makes me very, very hopeful. And it's been a pleasure to hear from all of you and to see your faces, even if you couldn't see mine today. Thank you so much for coming. And next year, I'm going to be there bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Great. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed seems a good way to end. I think a few sort of concluding reflections and comments from my side. This is fundamentally about leadership and new models of leadership as much as new models of partnership and leadership that is far more thoughtful, intentional, inclusive, humble, and yet visionary at the same time, and accountable and transparent. And I think what we've heard today is three different types and levels of leadership, all of which are needed simultaneously, and which us as individuals have a role in. And the first is what I would call sort of collective leadership coalitions and platforms, which are either pre-competitive business coalitions or multi-stakeholder coalitions at sort of fairly large-scale levels that are trying to drive sort of systems-level change, advocacy, harnessing global supply chains, etc. And we've heard some great examples of that from the We Mean Business Coalition, on the climate goals, to the Business Commission to Tackle Inequality, to the Digital Wage Coalition. Really important coalitions, and the more we can have those at a sort of a pre-competitive industry level and on your energy systems, health systems, education systems, financial systems, your food systems, I think that's one critical type of leadership. And as several people have said, building on what's already there, and mapping and focusing in on the ones that have real traction. The second is what I would call sort of individual organizational leadership, and whether it's the United Nations or a particular company or a nonprofit organization or an academic institution, I'm realizing more and more the importance, the person at the top, she and he or they really matter. And finding ways to make sure that our institutional leaders are out there more as champions is crucial on these issues. But then also sort of realizing that you're having policies in place and being clear that all the functions, certainly from a business side, it's not just the chief executive officer and the chief sustainability officer and the sort of sustainability experts and the human rights experts, but it's the chief legal officers, the chief financial officers, the business unit heads that are absolutely critical. So you're taking sort of an institutional level approach and having policies, metrics, measures, and then being reporting and transparent and accountable of those is important. And then last and underpinning everything else is what I would call just personal passion and commitment, leadership, and that realization. We've heard several examples today that if we'd had the time, we could go in some of these biggest coalitions, or some of the greatest things that the UN have done have been because of one individual or a small group of individuals, and often not the person at the top, but people within organizations who have the ability to build internal coalitions and the passion and the evidence and the energy to drive change. And so I think if we think, all of us of that, that personal passion and commitment, which could sort of ladder up and influence our organizational leadership, and then that sort of ladders up to this collective platforms and coalitions. I think despite all the headwinds, as numerous people have talked about, those are our tailwinds. Those are our superpower, and just the incredible honor and privilege of continuing to be part of this group of good friends and colleagues and new generation leaders coming in the whole time, whereas those oldies of us are hopefully still as passionate and energetic as we've always been. And on the topic of which I'd like to say thanks very much for being with us, and call on Zahid and Yvette to close us off for this year's Global Goals Summit.
Thank you so much. So say a big thank you to all of you online and in Nairobi and here in New York. A big thank you to Meta for hosting us today, and for our partners for this session, BCUN and the Harvard Kennedy School Corporate Responsibility Initiative. I want to say a special thank you, though, to Jane, who has been a mentor and a friend and a motivator for more than 20 years to us personally, and I'm sure to many of you who knew her. So a special round of applause for Jane.
Yes. Well, we've had a wonderful 3 days, so many insights, so much participation. Thank you, everyone online, London, Nairobi, here in New York. We're going to try and bring all those insights together in some short insights papers by the end of next week. So look out for them. We're going to do highlight videos. Those will be going on social media, raise awareness for all these important issues. Do share them, do spread the word. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this Global Goals Summit. It has been my honor and pleasure to perform for you across the 3 days. In case you missed it, I am sharing with you my opening performance from day 1 to reflect on the importance of partnerships. It's my cello rendition of Stand By Me by Ben King.